I think we've all experienced deja vu. You walk into a place or a situation, maybe somewhere you've never been before, something you've never experienced, and it immediately feels familiar, strangely so. And that is exactly what I experienced the first time I held a Browning high power. We'll call it deja vu. So in my written review of this gun, I kind of started with an anecdote, and it was literally the first time I ever saw or held a Browning high power. I walked into a gun shop near here, just north of Cincinnati, and I was just kind of browsing, looking around, something that looked interesting, and I saw an older Browning high power. It had some rust and patina. It just looked like an older gun. And, of course, I'd known about the high power, but I'd never been super interested in trying one. As you know from watching my other reviews, I like double action, single action guns, and, the idea of a single action only gun that I may or may not carry, I didn't pursue it. It was never top of my list. So I saw one in there, first time I'd ever see one, and I said, okay, well, I'll take a look at that. And I don't know that I had any expectations. I was just kind of curious. And the price tag was $1,200, and this was shortly after FN had discontinued the high power, so prices had gone through the roof. And in retrospect, I think that was a T series, which are kind of the most sought after for collectors. So that's why it was so expensive. But I didn't know any of that at the time. And so, the guy pulls it out of the case and he hands it to me, and as soon as I get this thing in my hands, something just clicked. And it felt, as the title, Deja Vu, suggests, it just felt immediately familiar. And I'd never held one before. And I think that says something about why the high power is special, and why recently you've seen kind of a resurgence in interest in the high power. There's so many different clones have come out in the past few years, kind of in the shadow of FN discontinuing the gun. You've got ones that are made in Turkey. You've got the TSAS, the Gerson. You've got Springfield's new SA-35, and now FN is introducing a new gun that they're calling the high power, the HIGH power, which is to differentiate it from the HI power, which is usually what this is called, or it's also called the P35. But long story short, the industry seems to be capitalizing on a growing or maybe resurfacing interest in this gun. So, and I think my experience with this gun, just in terms of holding it and just feeling that immediate familiarity, I think that's why. And if I had to put the feeling that you get when you hold one of these things in perspective, I would say it feels connected. You feel more connected to this gun than you do so many other guns. And there's no one aspect of the gun that just makes it feel that way. It's everything working, I think, together to create this gestalt where it's more than the sum of its parts in terms of how it feels and how it shoots and how it handles. And just looking at some of the kind of high points of why I think this gun feels so good. One is kind of this relationship between the width of the grip. You've got it's a double stack gun. It's the first double stack gun, but you've got a fairly wide grip, so it gives you a good amount of lateral support. But that combined with what is a super short trigger reach, as I've said in other videos, I got pretty small hands, and look how much finger I can get out in front of that trigger. So you can pull it, even I can pull it straight back, completely controlled. There's no angles that are going to cause right, left, some error and windage when you're shooting. Combine that with the good support you get from the double stack magazine, the wider grip, and I mean the thing just feels locked in there. And then just the profile of the high power, especially in terms of the slide, is I think unique. One, it sits so low in your hand. You think about a Glock having kind of a bit of a lower bore axis than other popular guns. I don't have a Glock to compare it, but the bore axis on this feels very low, and that is, I think, important when you have a gun with a lower bore axis, and just making it feel just dialed in and connected, and like you can feel what you're aiming at. That's what I think a low bore axis helps you with. And then the slide is so narrow, and not only does that a benefit for carrying inside the waistband, but I don't know, there's just something about the way it handles, the way you just want to wield it. I guess is the best way to say it. And it's fairly long, and it's balanced just right. It's not too top heavy, but it has enough length that it feels like you're pointing something at something, and it does all those things right. And I think that's one reason that's the reason it feels so special in your hands, and I think one reason it feels familiar. And to that point about this gun feeling familiar, in my written review, I kind of got into some ideas about, is there some instinct we all have when it comes to shooting and aiming? And it goes back to that adage that I've heard, if God didn't want me to shoot, why did he give me a trigger finger? But maybe there's something to that. And if we do have just kind of an instinct, aiming and shooting, I think feels instinctive to some degree. Maybe it's something that's in all of us. I think no other gun just kind of captures that and speaks to that part of us, if it is a part of us, more than the Browning high power. And I don't know if John Browning and Dudani Saive if that's what they were thinking of when they designed this, but they nailed it, man. And this was, fairly early in the history of semi-automatics. We're talking late 20s, and they created something 80 some years ago that nothing has really surpassed today in terms of just how well it speaks to you and how well it connects to your just natural instincts to shoot. And this gun is superlative in that respect. And certainly it's accurate. That's one reason I think it shoots so well. And so I took my high power to the range to get some shooting footage for this video, and a couple interesting things happened. I took it yesterday first, and you'll notice in the rest of the video, I've got wood grips on the gun. So I had never actually shot the gun with those grips on it. I put them on a few months ago just because, someone was selling them on a forum, and they looked cool, and they felt pretty good. So I thought I'd like them, but I noticed I was shooting the gun right. And, I'm right-handed, and usually if you're not shooting all that great, a right-handed person will shoot left. So that's That's usually what happens to me. I hardly ever shoot a gun right, but it was a nice tight group. The high power usually shoots pretty accurate for me, but the grouping was good. It was just off to the right. It was weird. I just couldn't get it to go to point of aim. So today I switched the grips out to what I had kind of always used on this gun, and these are VZ G10 grips. They're a little more low profile, and they feel good. The wood grips actually had a more aggressive texture, which I kind of liked. But in any case, I shot it with this, and the group was more centered and more what I'm used to as far as accuracy with the high power. So that was good. But the other thing is I did have a failure to feed with this gun, and I've never had a failure to feed with this gun. In the probably, thousands, 2,000 rounds I've put through it since I've owned it. That's an estimate. But I was using remanufactured ammo, so there's that. And I was looking at some of the rounds as I was loading them into the mags, and the crimp on the top edge of the casing where it holds the bullet, it looked like it was had a little bit of a flare to it. So I'm thinking that kind of got caught on the way into the chamber, and I actually had a similar issue with a CZ. So I was using Freedom Munitions 115 grain remanufactured. I'm not sure that's the best option with a Browning high power. So that kind of sucked, but I like I said, the gun has been 100% reliable ever since I've had it with other ammo I've put through it. All factory ammo has never had a problem. So I know some people do have problems with remanufactured ammo, and I probably won't be buying that brand again. As just a kind of side note, while I was at the range, I shoot and then I kind of do my rounds, see if they have anything interesting in the case. And they did. They had a Walther P88 Compact in basically brand new condition. And, if you know guns, if you're kind of into hipster guns, I don't have to tell you about this. You know what this is, and you probably know how much it costs, especially in like new condition. And I got this thing for $5.99. So, I can't be. The failure to feed was a little disappointing, but man, to get that kind of deal, sometimes you just are in the right place at the right time, and that was certainly the case. So definitely, I haven't shot it yet, obviously, but when I get some rounds to this, definitely want to review this. The trigger is, well, I guess we're going to get into some of the I don't want to say negatives, but the things in which the high power does not excel. And one of those things is the trigger. It's just obviously a single action only gun, so how bad can it really be? But it's not as good as other single action triggers, and inevitably this gun gets compared to the 1911 because of the family lineage of John Browning. But this gun just doesn't have the intuitive, direct feel to the trigger that a 1911 does. The trigger's heavy. I think it's. I wouldn't say the single action on a stock Beretta 92 is light per se. It's probably about 6 pounds. This is heavier. I promise you, it's heavier. I want to say it's probably 7 or 8 pounds, maybe more, depending on if you leave the magazine disconnect installed. And these guns do have by default a magazine disconnect. When I got this one, it had already been taken out, so I didn't put it back in. So I've never actually shot one with a magazine disconnect installed, but I know that can affect the trigger pull weight. The brake is fine. There's nothing. I mean, it snaps. It has a nice crisp snap, but I still feel like the brake on a Beretta 92, for instance, is just a little more crisp and a little more, I don't know, intuitive. It just feels a little better. The other thing that's not great about the high power trigger is the reset. So you pull it, slide cycles, and if you let it out, I'm sure you couldn't hear it, but there's just the slightest tick. But you can't really feel it. You can't really hear it when you're shooting. It doesn't give your finger that little push that some guns do, especially the SIGs. They give your finger a nice little push back to the reset point. There's none of that on this. You kind of just have to know where the trigger resets and just kind of plan for it. And if I haven't shot the high power in a while, inevitably the first few mags I will short stroke the trigger. It's something that happens. And I don't want to make that seem like a bigger deal than it is, because literally you do it the first few times and you're like, oh, okay, I need to let my finger go out farther, and it doesn't happen anymore. And I've shot this gun in some USPSA matches, and it does just fine. I don't have a problem with short stroking the trigger even when I'm shooting fairly quickly. And to that point, another one of, I think, the high power strengths is it's proven, and it's probably more proven than just about any other gun, maybe besides the 1911, because that was designed earlier, than any other gun you're going to find. And you think about the Beretta 92, for instance, or even a SIG P226. Those are fairly old, proven designs that have been through the ringer in terms of military service, police service, so we all know they work. And this goes back like 40 years before those guns. So, this thing's been, around since before World War II. And it fought on both sides of World War II. The Allies used it when the Germans occupied Belgium. They produced it. You can find ones with actual Nazi markings on there. It was sold commercially. The British Armed Forces, it was their standard issue pistol. The Australian Armed Forces, it was their standard issue pistol. Like throughout the Cold War, it's still used in Canada. They kind of had their own version that they made in Canada. It was made by a company called Inglis, and they are still using those things. And apparently they're having problems with them just because they're so damn old. They were made kind of before World War II, so the parts are drying up, and the parts are breaking after they've used these things for 70 years. So that's understandable, but it's not to say that the gun isn't capable and reliable if you maintain it and have the right parts for it. So, and in my experience, if you've done any kind of steel shooting matches, you shoot the hell out of these things, and you put a lot of rounds through them in a short amount of time. I've shot at paper many times. Other than that, I've put a lot of rounds through mine, and it's never had an issue. So, is there anything else not to like about it? And there is one issue that I need to address, and that is the issue of hammer bite. And as we talked about before, just the profile of this gun, it allows you to get really close in to the bore, low bore axis, and that's one reason it feels so good to shoot. But it's kind of a double-edged sword, and you can see how close my hands get into that hammer. And if my hands were any bigger or meatier, I'd probably get pinched. And I don't experience that in this gun. I've never had an issue with that, but some people do, and I can definitely see why. So that can be an issue for some people if you've got real big hands. I don't. People do complain of that. And I will say that the earlier high powers had ring hammers. I think they went to the spur hammer like this one on the MK2s, maybe. Definitely MK3s pretty much all had the spur hammer. Though I think the high power practicals, which were the two-tone ones with the silver frames, which are dope but expensive, those actually had ring hammers. But all the MK3s and most of the MK2s after a certain point all went to the spurred hammer because it was less likely to pinch you than the ring hammers. And to that point, I guess the hammer's not actually poking you. This spur isn't coming back and like poking you in the hand. It's the meat of your hand getting pinched under this shaft here. And so the ring hammers had more of a curve that came out, and so they would come closer to the meat of your hand, and that's what would pinch you. So they moved away from that, went to the spur hammer, and I think that helped. Still, you saw how close I was. If you got really big hands, I think it still may be an issue for you. Maybe not, I don't know. As they say, your mileage may vary. Also, I will say that Cylinder Slide offers what they call a no-bite hammer, and it has I've never tried one, but it has a different design than any of the factory hammers. So I guess they kind of minimize the shaft. And you can take these things to a gunsmith. You can get an extended beaver tail kind of welded on, I think. That's obviously going to be expensive. That could be an issue for you, so check it out. But there are some potential fixes that you can use to mitigate that issue. Also, like I said before, looking at the thin slide, this is actually a pretty good concealed carry gun. My other kind of favorite 9mm gun is the Beretta 92, favorite full-size 9mm. I shoot both these guns extremely well, and I just love shooting both of them. I feel like the trigger and just the kind of recoil response on the Beretta 92 is a bit more communicative, intuitive, whereas the high power just feels more connected, more dialed in, and I shoot both of them great. But the high power offers something that the Beretta doesn't, and that is it's not huge. The high power is actually pretty compact for a quote-unquote full-size gun. The grip is somewhat shorter than you're going to find on most other, like, duty-oriented service pistols, combat pistols. Like a 226 is going to have a longer grip. Beretta 92 is going to have a bit longer of a grip. So that is nice in this, and like I said, the thin slide, and the fact that it just sits lower. It's got a lower profile than many other larger guns, and the kind of proof point to that is that this will fit in a car holster, KHR, car arms. I had one of those for a while, and I kept the holster because this thing fits in it. And my SIGs or Berettas, they won't come close. The height of the slide is just too high, and it just won't fit. But the point being is that this is just, at its core, a smaller gun than a Beretta or a SIG or a CZ75, something like that, or an HK USP. Again, I think that's one reason it handles so well, especially for some with smaller hands. So those are reasons why it's a decent carry gun, and it feels pretty good, and it's definitely comfortable in the waistband because of this thin grip, thin slide. The only thing that isn't great about this from a concealed carry perspective is this hammer. If I have my druthers, I prefer DASA, double action, single action, for a carry gun. I just think it makes the most sense. I won't get into that, but I like that system for concealed carry. That said, I'm not opposed to carrying, a single action only gun that's cocked and locked. This has got a good positive safety. The Mark IIIs came out with a better, more positive safety than I think some of the Mark IIs had this same safety too. Don't quote me on that, but the later high powers had a good safety that you can depend on. It feels good. It's positive. It has a nice snick, just like a good 1911 safety. So that's fine with me for carry from a safety perspective. This has never come off. It's not going to come off. When you're carrying it. But the hammer is, for lack of a better word, pokey. It's kind of sharp, and with that thing sticking up, I carry appendix, and when you bend over, you feel this thing. And some holsters kind of protect you a little better than others, but that's one thing that kind of sucks. And I don't plan to carry it a whole lot, so it's not that big of a deal. But if I did, there is a great solution that I've considered adding to this gun, and that is the SFS. I think it's called the Safety Fast Shooting System, or Safety Fast System, something like that. But it's been around for a while, and basically, it's a replacement hammer. I think it has a different sear and safety as well. But basically, what it allows you to do is carry the gun with the hammer down, but still cocked. So there's like a hinge on the hammer, and when you operate the safety, when you put the safety on, it just hinges the hammer forward, but the mainspring's still compressed. It's still technically cocked. And then, when you put the safety up, it puts the hammer down. And then when you thumb the safety down, it just snicks the hammer back. Then you have that nice single action trigger pull waiting for you. It's not unlike the system that you find on the Daewoo and Lionheart guns, the Korean K5 service pistol variants. They have a very similar system that I think was kind of inspired by this, or it could have been the other way around. I'm not really sure. But yeah, they have an ability, you can carry hammered down but still cocked. Same thing. But those are awesome guns, by the way. I have one, and I do want to review it. They're great guns. But that allows you that mitigates the issue of having this hammer sticking out and poking into you. So that is a good fix. It's a well-respected system. It works. FN even sold high powers, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s with this system pre-installed. And so it works. It's good. It doesn't screw up the trigger pull from what I've heard. And like I said, I've considered putting that on this one, but I don't plan to carry this thing a ton. I'm pretty happy with my SIGs, my P239s when it comes to concealed carry, so I didn't see the need to kind of modify this from stock, keep it kind of original. But you do have that option. So where does that leave us? The high power is awesome. Back to this idea of kind of the interest in it having a renaissance in recent years. Like I said, there are numerous options with clones out there, and there have been other clones produced in other countries, some under license over the years. The FEG, the FEG ones are made in Hungary. The FM, not FN as in Nancy, FM as in Matt, those are made in Argentina under license, and they're solid from what I hear. And then you've got the Turkish ones, you've got the SA-35. But I think there's something to be said about the original. And, I was interested in maybe getting one of those clones when when the Gerson and the TSAS and the SA-35 were announced. But I'll give a shout out to a fellow YouTuber, BH Spring Solutions. They are a group of, I think it's kind of one guy, Mark Allen. He basically is a high power specialist, and they do high power customization and gunsmithing, and they've even engineered some new products. They do a lot with the high power, and you can send yours to them and they'll make it even more awesome than it is, trigger jobs, whole 9 yards. But they have a series of YouTube videos where they get into the weeds on the technical detail, the construction, the design of these guns, and they go through. There's some videos on the TSAS and the SA-35, and they're now doing one on the Gerson one, where they go through the different parts and they test everything from the hardness to the proportions and how they fit. And in just about every case, they found that the other designs were inferior. Just one example being the extractor. They found that the extractors that TSAS was using and that Springfield was using in the SA-35 were not wide enough to have the amount of grip that is optimal for good extraction on on 9mm casings. And if you look at some of the anecdotes from people who've bought the SA-35, they start to have extractor problems after they often start to have extractor problems after a couple thousand rounds. So, and also they looked at the channel that the extractor rides in, and some of the serrations were kind of encroaching into the space, and they were kind of impeding the extractor's ability to pivot. So things like that kind of dissuade me from picking up one of these clones. And you're going to pay more if you buy an original, but I think it's worth it. And if you get like a surplus one, you can maybe get in under $700. But if you get a decent one, you're going to pay $800-900 for. When I say decent, one in good condition that hasn't had the crap beat out of it by the IDF or some other military service. But it's worth it, especially with what they're charging for some guns nowadays. The price of 1911s being well over four figures. Add one of these to your collection. Pony up some bucks when you have some money. Get a good high power, and it's going to last you a long time, and it'll be a gun you can really enjoy and appreciate. Also, there is the new, like I mentioned before, there is the new FN HIGH power that they introduced at SHOT Show this year, and I don't think any have hit the market yet. But that is a completely new design. If you look at it, it really, and even say this, it doesn't really have anything to do with the original high power, which we'll call the P35. And I'm not mad at FN for that. I feel that innovation is good. That they're looking to create kind of a new take on, metal framed, single action, hammer fired guns. I think that's good. So I'm curious to see what what that brings to the table and how it feels, how it shoots. And I guess I trust FN, the originators of this, of the double stack service pistol, to get it right more than a company who's just looking to clone the originals. So we'll see. But in closing, I will say that if you don't have a high power, consider getting one. Consider getting an original. I can speak to the MK3s that they're really good. I've had nothing but good luck with this one. It fits so well, shoots so well, and I just can't help but love the high power. So on that note, I want to say thank you for watching, and check out the written review. The link is in my profile, and if you like beats like the one in the intro, check out my SoundCloud. The link is also in the profile. I'm Matt, this is Hipster Tactical, and talk to you later.